Hi there, I'm Sammy, otherwise known as Woven Jackalope on most social medias and on YouTube. I am a prop and costume maker from the UK. I do that as my job. I'm mainly known for making larger, more complicated costumes like Five Nights at Freddy's costumes or a catnap quad suit that I debuted earlier this year. I've decided I'd start making YouTube videos. So this one I'm going to be doing a multi-video series breaking down how I make my Five Nights at Freddy's heads mainly, but this is the same for most of the heads that I make, aside from ones that I can't get the models of. So in this video, a series, I'm going to be making a Freddy Fazbear head, mainly because I haven't made one of Freddy yet. So as you can see, I've got Google up at the moment. Most of my gaming related models, I use model rips from the games. I mainly find them on this website up here, which is called the Model Resource. I will put the link to the actual website in the description. So this is generally where I start. So I'm going to go to search, and I've already searched this earlier because I've looked it up many times. I know kind of what most of these are like, so I know in my case I'll just go through anyway and show what some of these have. So there's of course AR, the mobile game, which has quite a lot of models because they really put everything into that game. It does have Freddy Fazbear, but I'm not going to be using it for this video. Instead, I am going to be using the Freddy Fazbear game rip from the VR version of Help Wanted. And then just a quick view of the security breach page. They've got quite a lot of things. They even have some of the props from Bruin, like the walkie-talkie, the maintenance tool, the Faz wrench, and the Vanny security mask. Weirdly, they don't have any of the actual ruined animatronics. They just have the shattered versions. I'm not quite sure why they've not been put up yet. But anyway, this is the model that I'm going to be using. I have already downloaded it, but if you go onto this page and you want to download it, you just hit where it says download this model. If you're using something from Model Resource, then it's also a good idea to beforehand check what the actual file type of the model is. In this case, you can see here it'll give you a contents list, and you can see that most of these are PNGs because most of these are the different texture files. We've got 3 different versions of Freddy. But the actual Freddy model, which is the same for all of them, is a .dae file that can be opened in our case, we're going to be opening that in Blender. And now, if I go into import and DAE into my downloads, this will be here and it will show Freddy.dae. So now we import that in, and this gives us a giant Freddy. Well, he's not actually very giant. Yeah, I guess he's quite tall, but sometimes if you've just started using Blender, you might find that it will cut through like this. That's pretty common especially when you're working on larger to scale models. So if you use this sidebar here, go into view and go to end. I personally have my end distance up at 10,000, but 5,000 will probably work. So this is the model. It does have textures already attached. As you can see, it's just the basic Freddy textures. And first, what I'm going to do is I am going to remove the rig, so the bones. I'm going to go select both of them, just with selecting either the bones or the model first, then holding shift and selecting the other, right clicking, going to parent and clear parent. This just makes it a little bit easy. You don't have to do this, but I just prefer it. And then we're gonna select the bones, which are these little weird shaped things. Hit X and delete those because we do not need them and they just kind of get in the way. This has also made Freddy shrink down. So to start with, we don't need it to be massive. We'll scale it up later. One of the important things that I do want to note is one of the common errors that I see from when someone is just starting out with making game files 3D printed is you can't just stick this model into a slicer. So if I save this as an STL, I'll be able to show you why. So let's export that as Freddy. If you're exporting, also make sure to have selection only on. I have made that mistake way too many times. So the problem is, as you can see at the moment, he has all these flat spots, which Freddy doesn't usually have in the game. That is because generally with games, they don't really need to worry about the flat surfaces of the polygon count, because you can fix that with shading. With 3D prints, it specifically uses that. So one of the annoying things that Blender commonly does is it has everything automatically set to shade smooth. But if you set this to shade flat and I take away the textures, you can see that he is actually quite blocky. So this is the main first thing we need to fix. Although the actual first step I'm going to do is just separating the head from everything. The way that I'm going to do that is I am going to go into edit mode. So there's a select drop here. You start off in object mode. We want edit mode with Freddy selected. The shortcut for that is tab. And then I'm going to hover over different parts of it and press L on my keyboard. That will highlight all linked faces. And I'm just going to do that for all of the parts of the head that matter. So his main head, his eyebrows, the eyes. The eyes aren't necessarily important if you're going to add your own eyes, but still, I'm planning on adjusting the eyes. So I'm just going to go through and do all this. So those are all the bits that you mainly need to select. For this case, at least, you can also see his endoskeleton head in there. If I go to the wireframe view, we don't need that for the actual 3D print model. Now with all of those selected, I'm going to go up to select and hit invert, or you can press Ctrl I, and that will select everything else. Then you hit X, and that brings up the delete menu. Then hit faces, and we have just the Freddy head. And obviously at the moment we still have that issue of it being very blocky. So the way that you generally fix that is by either remeshing and smoothing it out manually in the sculpt tool, or you can use the subdivision modifier, which generally works for most cases. The problem with using the subdivision modifier though is it can't really differentiate between what you want to subdivide and what you don't want to subdivide. So in this case, the main issue with that, So subdivision modifier is found under the modifiers tab. You should hit add modifier, then it's in the generate menu. So as you can probably see with this, it's made him look a lot smoother, but it has also messed up his teeth quite a lot. And Freddy, like, he has those big blocky teeth, so we want to keep that really. We also probably, you might want to keep this looking blocky as well, because it fits with the animatronic endoskeletons look. So we're gonna remove the subdivision modifier, go back into edit mode, and select those parts that we don't want to get messed up by the subdivision modifier. There's probably an easier way to do this, but this is the way that I always use because it's also fairly quick. And then right click, go to separate by selection, and that will separate them from the model. So now you can see that we have two rig Freddys in the scene collection here. And now when we go back, we can use the subdivision modifier again, and it will not affect those areas that we wanted to keep blocky and square. Additionally, you can just take these into edit mode and add loop cuts in here. So if I just select this whole section here, and if the loop cuts, you want to get rid of these diagonals. So one way to do that is going into the face menu and going tries to quads, and that will remove those. Then you can just either use the loop cuts here, and you can select where you want your loop cuts, and if you have these just close to the edges, that will stop it from messing up the those sharp edges with the subdivision surface, but that doesn't really matter for us. You can also use the inset faces as well, which I will just quickly show. So if you just select this, you select each face. Annoyingly, you can't do all of them at the same time. And then you just inset the faces slightly. That will also do the same thing, where it gives an area where it will keep that sharp corner. And I'll just quickly show you as well in the subdivision modifier what that looks like. So you can see there that this one is a lot more rectangular than the others. It sort of kept that shape a lot more. So next, what I want to do is kind of figure out what the different pieces are going to be and start separating them out. So obviously his eyes are going to be separate for this. The ears I'm probably going to have separate, as well as the hat. The hat's quite a good place to store electronics, I'd imagine. You can probably hide any batteries or Arduinos or stuff in the hat, or hiding them inside the empty space of the muzzle. And speaking of empty space, with this model, this doesn't really matter, but sometimes when you have a full solid head, when you cut into it, obviously this one is empty already inside, and it has a wall thickness to it. With heads like the Vanny head, they're just a ball. So when you take any of the faces out to empty it out, it's just one layer of flat polygons. So to print that, you have to use the subdivision modifier, which is, the solidify modifier, which is down here, which just adds thickness to a plane, or adds thickness to polygons. But with this case, with Freddy, we already have that. You can see the border between the two walls there. So we're gonna hit apply on that subdivision modifier. And now we are gonna separate the different areas that we wanna print. Actually, first I'm just gonna connect these back together. So now that I've done the subdivision modifier, they don't need to be separate anymore, and it just kind of clutters up the collection. So we're going to select them both with Shift and hit Join, and that merges them back into one single model. So now we need to decide what different parts are going to be separate. With the lower jaw, I'm probably going to have as one piece. So I'm going to select all of the teeth and the jaw, and then I'm going to separate those by selection. And then I'm going to do each of the ears individually as well. To speed this up, I'm just going to hit P instead. Okay, so now we have all of them as different separate models that we can adjust individually. Firstly, I think I want to scale this head up to size so that I can get an idea of space. First, I'm gonna import a reference. I'm just gonna scale this up so that it's roughly what I want it to be. I'm just using the panels to move it around, get an idea of where I kind of want this and how big I want it. This is probably going to be quite a big head. I'll probably take that section out. Yeah. I think that's probably a decent size for it. As you can see, the eyes are relatively in line on the head of the person. The eyes are kind of in line with where the eyes are. I might actually make this smaller so that it will sit on the head instead. Nope. Yeah, so instead it kind of sits on top of the head instead, and then you're able to see out of the mouth, because you do have to think about how you are going to see out of these masks. It is not just blindly walk. I've done ones where I see out the mouth, or I've also made the eyes slightly smaller and shifted them so I can see out of the gaps in between. My Vanny head is one where I see out of the actual eyes, but those eyes are clear, a transparent red acrylic, so they look close enough to the game's version that I can get away with that. Yeah, you'd be able to see fairly well out of that. I think you'd be able to see where you need to, which is directly down. If you're wearing this at conventions, then you have to worry about children. Quite often, I've had children that just run in front of me and I've not been able to see them. So yeah, I think I'm quite happy with the sizing of that. So now it's a case of getting it so that the model will fit the face. So the main part of that is mainly with this jaw and taking some of the back out here. I'll probably take a lot more of the back out so that I can just move the head back further. And the way I'm going to do that is in the sculpt mode. which is kind of my preference for things like this. And so sculpt mode, you've got a lot of different brushes that you can use here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I think, hide the head for a moment. So this will only work on the model that you had selected when you went to it. And I'm just going to use this to move this part. I'm going to go back to object mode, move the head back a bit so that I can get a better idea of where it's naturally going to be in the actual mask. I also have to account for if I'm going to add foam to a head as well. I often add foam on the insides just to make it a bit more comfortable. So that's probably about how I want it. So now the main section I need to sort out is the jaw. And this is going to be where we're taking quite a lot of material off, because as you can see, the head is clipping directly into the model. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take a mesh, then generate a cylinder, and I'm going to scale this up to roughly the width of the head. So that's probably kind of where I want it. And if you're worried about your face showing in the mask, then just wear like a balaclava or something, and you can also just paint kind of silvery bits on the balaclava to make it look like there's an endoskeleton in there. That's quite a good effect that I've seen some people do. So now we have this cylinder. Again, this is just a very kind of quick way to do this. But this cylinder is very roughly the proportions of the head. If I was actually doing this for a commission, I would probably be a lot more thorough with where my cuts were and how accurate things were. But this is just kind of a quick little tutorial, and then you can kind of adapt what you want to do from there. So what I just did was use the Boolean modifier I added the Boolean modifier onto the lower jaw and selected the tool, the object, as the cylinder that we just made. And now that should have removed a chunk of the jaw. So this would comfortably fit your face. Sometimes it's a good idea to measure key dimensions of your face and match a head to it by scaling it in different directions. So this would generally quite comfortably fit someone's face inside. Now the next problem that was the jaw is fairly well done at this point. We're going to apply that Boolean. And now we can hide that for the moment. The next part that I want to focus on are the eyes. And thinking about it, what I might do, I might add just some simple electronics to the eyes. Just simply add some LEDs. I've got some addressable NeoPixel LED rings that I've used for a previous project for making the movie version of Springtrap, and I might use those. So in this case, these eyes are symmetrical, so we can just kind of work on one and then mirror it over to the other. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to edit mode. I think what I'm probably going to do is a similar thing to what I did for that Springtrap head, where I had just half of the eye and then they went onto brackets inside of the head. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select everything with A, then lock to the X facing viewport, and I'm going to use the bisect tool, click and drag. Usually these will either be for a vertical cut like this, then obviously the z-axis will be 0 and the x-axis already is because I'm locked in on that axis. So it's roughly where I wanted it already, and I'm gonna hit clear outer and fill. That just fills in the main gap. It's not filled in everything here, but I'll go back in and fix that. It's very much not pretty, but it has worked. And it doesn't really matter how ugly this looks because, as I mentioned, all of this is going to be going through a remesh process anyway, right at the end before we go to the slicer software. Also, while I remember, I am going to save. Blender does have a file backup system, but it's always good to save anyway. I have lost a lot of progress before from Blender deciding it wants to crash. So now I am going to go to object mode, and you can see that that back section there is perfectly flat now. The hat doesn't really need to be changed. That should just stick on with glue perfectly fine. If you were wanting to hollow it out for whatever reason, with the subdivision modifier there, you can select all these areas. So I'm going to use the select circle and going to select this ring, and then I'm gonna inset faces, scale them in. So I'm going to extrude. You can either click extrude here, or I tend to just hit the E key. You can see that moving up there. Problem currently is there's this space here. So what I'm going to do is just select all of these sections, If you select anything that you didn't mean to, then you can hit Control. Now we can just delete these faces because they don't matter for this. You can see the hat is all hollowed out. And I might just keep it like this for the sake of saving on filament, since I've done this already. Okay, so now I need to figure out how I want to attach the eye on the inside of the head. And the way I am going to do that is by making a bracket that they go on. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to add this this cube. I'm already on scale. I'm going to thin it out a bit and make it a bit taller. And then I'm going to drag it all the way across until it goes from one edge of the head to the other. Just going to move that slightly. So it only needs to bridge the inside walls of the head. And now these eyes are basically going to fit into here and attach permanently. And the way they're going to do that is I'm going to add a pin or 2 pins that will locate the eye in place in the correct distance. Now I'm going to add new object. I'm going to add another cylinder. And this cylinder is going to get scaled down to about, say, 6 millimeters. If you want it to snap to specific dimensions, you can either hold control while you're dragging these different areas. It will snap them. So yeah, 6 for this sort of size, 6 millimeters will be fine. Now I'm gonna drag this, hit G, drag this up to here. I'm gonna make it a little bit longer as well, just for the sake of making sure it goes deep enough. Now I'm gonna rotate this, holding control again so that I can get it perfectly 90 degrees. And I am going to position this. It is kind of hard to see where the rectangle is. I can kind of see it as the top being here and the bottom being here, so I can position this in a decent area. I'm probably going to put one there. I'm going to press Shift and D to duplicate it, and put another one opposite so that they act as 2 locating pins. And with that done, what I'm going to do first is move them so they're flush with, or roughly flush with this face, because these are going to be separate pins that I'm going to push in later. This one could do with going up a little bit more as well. Now I need to think about how I am going to attach my LEDs into the eyes. So if you know what LEDs you're using, then you're going to want to measure the dimensions and figure out, what size they are. So I'm just going to grab one of the LEDs from my electronics box. So these LEDs are kind of like coins. When I get to actually printing this model, you'll be able to see what sort they are. I do have a video of me testing them out for Springtrap on my Instagram, so I might link that post down below. And while you're looking at it, you might as well follow me there, follow me here as well, or subscribe here to know when that next video comes out. So these are about 23 millimeters in diameter, and they're about just over 3 millimeters. So I'm just going to duplicate this again, and instead I'm going to move it a bit in front of the eye and change these dimensions here. So I'm going to change that to the X and the Y to 23. And the Z to... I probably don't really need to change the Z, because I need that depth to get it in. So we'll just round that up to an even 30. Now the Y facing view, and I'm going to roughly eyeball it. Well, I can actually just look at the model here and get it so that it's about where his the center of his eye is. And then we are just going to plunge that in there. And just so I know kind of how deep it is, I'm going to go to wireframe view. I swap between wireframe and model quite a lot. So now we can use actually, I don't need the head anymore, so I can hide that. And I'm going to use the Boolean modifier on the eye. Actually, before that, just to make things easier so that I can use this. And one thing I am going to do with this, which is this, again, these are very similar processes to what I used for Springtrap. I'm going to use this to make a plug that goes into the eye, a clear plug that I can make out of resin, in my case resin print. But you could just regular 3D print it and then cast it as well. So what I am going to do is I am going to select this edge. I'm going to alt select it so that I select the whole ring, and then I am going to inset a bunch of times. And now I will go back to face view and select all of these faces. Now I'm going to go up here and use the snap, and I'm going to snap to face, snap to face project. Now what this should do is snap that to the surface of the eye. Then what I can do is just move this out very slightly, and that gives an iris that will we can then use this model for the actual iris that we're going to put in there. So let's add a boolean and a boolean difference using this part. Just going to hide that just to check that it has actually cut through correctly, and it has. Now I am going to scale this slightly just so that I have space for the actual disc when I come to add it. So scale cage, again, you just hold on where it says scale, and you can use the scale cage that allows you to adjust from different points. And yeah, that should give me enough space behind that so that the light will shine through. This is going to be made out, this cylinder is going to be made out of clear resin. So now I want to start as just to finish off with the eye. I want to make a channel for the electronics to go through. So the way that I'm going to do that is by duplicating this again. It's easier just to duplicate parts rather than having to add in every time. Take this up. Scale it slightly. It doesn't need to be thick. The wires on this are only thin. Now I'm going to rotate it and get it so that it's going into that gap. You can see that gap that I already made with the boolean just now, that is now piercing into that. So that will allow the wires to come out of this space here. And I know I said about storing electronics in hat before. I might as well, since I've already talked about it. So to do that, I'm also going to need to cut a hole in the top of Freddy's head. You could just do this afterwards, but I might as well just do it now. So this is all parts that you've already seen. Okay, so I had a couple of little issues while doing that with just getting the booleans to work for the pins going into the eye. Or like sometimes when it's certain geometry, it doesn't like to cut properly. Sometimes that's fixed just by swapping between exact and fast, which are quite obvious settings on when you open up the remesh modifier. I'll show that a bit later, but I just had to put the remesh modifier early on the pins and the eye, just to get them to actually cut into each other properly. And I've also duplicated the eye and got it in the correct position. I've mirrored it as well so that we know the difference between the two when it comes to pinning them in. And now we can attach this bar. So this bar is going to be part of the geometry of the Freddy head. What I'm going to do is use a different boolean option. This time I'm going to use union and select that, and what that will do is it will basically merge the two geometries together, and it will mean that they're fused. So you can kind of see in the wireframe here that they are now fused together. Now I can cut in the holes for those locating pins in that bar. So let's apply that boolean and then create another. I'm just going to duplicate this 4 times and select each of the cylinders. Right, I think just to make this a bit easier for when I'm building it, I'm gonna attach this rectangular part of the ear into the Freddy head so that it prints with it. Then I can just slot these on afterwards. These aren't gonna be able to move, at least not on this one, so I don't really have to worry about how it goes and how solid it is, and it's not really a very visible part. Okay, I think this is probably ready to be remeshed now, so I'm going to remesh the whole Freddy head. Little tip while remeshing, sometimes it can be quite taxing on your PC, especially if you have quite a low grade CPU. Mine's about mid-range, so it struggles occasionally. If you put a cube in and you attach the remesh modifier to the cube, sometimes the voxel size that it starts off with is too slow, but is too small for the model, and it just lags your computer out like crazy, and can crash Blender as well. So I'm going to set this to 1mm, and I'm not going to apply it, but I'm going to select Freddy and then shift select that cube. Then I'm going to select copy to selected. 1mm is generally quite a thick voxel size, so it shouldn't lag too much. And then from that you can just start dropping it down, either with the slider or just by inputting. So let's try 0.3, which is fairly good. I would say that's probably good enough, or maybe not. I'll go down to 0.1. That should be fine. Yeah, that should be plenty for a mold. You can see now it's quite densely packed polygons. And before I attach that, I am just going to make the ends of these longer. So now, if we go back to object view, those are deeper now, so they'll slot in a lot more securely. They'll probably get glued in anyway, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so there, and you don't necessarily need to remesh every single part. I mean, I'm pretty sure I haven't remeshed the lower jaw still, so yeah, but for the case of 3D prints, sometimes it's helpful just to make sure that there aren't any like small air gaps that will make your print show up as non-manifold that could mess up your slicing software. So I'm just gonna go through and add a remesh modifier to everything to be safe. Now that I think about it, to be honest, I probably only need to do one ear because they look like they're pretty much identical. So I'm just going to hide one, just so that I have all the parts that I need to put in, that I need to export in one place. So now we can start exporting. So we're going to go to File, Export, STL. Make sure that you have selection only selected. I'm just going to make a new folder called Freddy. Okay, so that should be everything. That I need to print on that mask. Obviously, some of the stuff I need to print two of. What I might do, actually, looking at some of those, because these file sizes are quite big. So thinking of that, something I sometimes do, especially if I'm uploading these files somewhere, is I will use I'll go into generate and use the decimate modifier. So the decimate modifier will just let you reduce the polygon count of a model. It's very helpful for if you're especially if you've got like a slow computer, but some slicers don't like insanely high res models. So I am just gonna drop down the face count. You can see the face count there is quite high. So I'm just gonna go through and do that for every single part. Okay, so I've gone through and just quickly decimated all those files just to bring down that file size. As you can see now, they are a lot smaller than they were. So yeah, that I think what I probably will do is I could cover the 3D printing side and the slicing side in this video, but I think I will probably save that for the next video, considering looking at my my recording time, and I'm at almost 2 hours now, so I will leave that for the next one. That can be purely dedicated to the 3D printing and priming side of things. And yeah, so if you want to see the rest of the series of me building this Freddy head, then please subscribe. And if you want to see what other things I make, then I'm mostly active on Instagram under the same handle as I am on here, Woven Jackalope. I will probably be posting small updates of this project on there as well, and when it's finished I will likely be selling it, and the information for when that's being sold will be on my Instagram first, just because people there have supported me for most things, so generally most of my notifications go on there first, and if it doesn't sell on there, then it will go to my Etsy. But yeah, I hope that people enjoyed this video, and I hope that it helped beginners with 3D printing, or with wanting to make bigger costumes like this, understand a bit more what sort of things go into it. This is, as I said, a very simplified version of the Freddy head. If I was making one for myself, it would be a lot more complicated, and there'd be a lot more going into it, and this video would probably go on for another like 2-3 hours, or at least my recording would. Also, just an additional point of I will make these files available on my Etsy. Again, it's under the same name. It's very easy to find. Most of my 3D models that I've made for costumes are on there, although that's not a massive amount because most of the stuff I do is commission work. But yeah, I'll probably put these files up on there if people want to use them. If just a point to make though, if you don't have a 3D printer, then that's fine. Not everyone does. In fact, most cosplayers that I know don't. What I would suggest is I am planning on making a video at some point of how to make your fairly accurate game props and costumes from the game models out of things like cardboard or foam. I'm still working on the process of how exactly I want to do that. I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm just trialing them at the moment. I haven't had a really much chance to trial them outside of just thinking, but there are obviously places where you can get files 3D printed, such as PCBWay, which is a place that a lot of YouTubers in this community have been sponsored by. Obviously, I'm not sponsored by them. I am a tiny YouTuber. I've literally just started doing this with longer format videos. I personally wouldn't suggest them for 3D printed parts, because for of this scale at least, if you want specialist 3D printed parts, then they're probably a good one to go for like SLS printing and things like that. But for stuff like this, it is going to set you back a lot of money. My Vanny head, for example, for the base parts of that, if I went to PCBWay, it would be about, I think it came up to about almost $700, which is about between 500 and 600 pounds. So a lot of money. You could just buy a printer for that money, and buy the material that you need. What I would suggest, especially if you're a younger cosplayer that's wanting to get into this sort of thing, is look into maker spaces or areas like that. They're generally called maker spaces, or yeah, a lot of the times they're usually referred to as a maker space. They quite often have 3D printers, or at least the ones that I've come across. I don't know how many of them there are or how abundant they are in other countries. There's quite a few in America, I'm aware of that. That's kind of where the makerspace craze started, I believe. But then there's a decent number in the UK. Most of them seem to be set up by, most of the ones I've come across seem to be set up by universities as just a community thing. But generally they are a lot of the times they have 3D printers, or they have someone that does 3D printing that you can pay, like, sometimes they'll let you just pay the cost of materials, which for something like this probably be about maybe £40 worth of material. I don't know what that is in dollars. About 2 to 3 rolls of 1 kilogram PLA. And it's also a good place for you to be able to interact with people that like making. Quite often the cosplay community and the maker community overlaps quite a lot, so there'll often be people who also like cosplay and also like working on things like this, and maybe people that are more experienced with it that you can get tips off of. But those sorts of places, they weren't really a thing when I started cosplay. But I've not personally actually interacted directly with many. I still haven't been to my local one, but I've seen around a couple, and they are good places to go if you're starting out. There's generally a lot of people that know quite a bit of variety of different skills in those sorts of areas. So I would definitely suggest looking to see if there is anywhere like that in your area if you want to learn more about 3D printing like this, or get help directly with people. I mean, I'm generally, if you message me on Instagram or send me an email, if you get stuck with anything, if you have any questions, I'm happy to help out. Yeah, I'm gonna end that video here, and I hope that you enjoyed this first part of however many it takes me to make this Freddy head.